I swear I see it all more than my family. Well, you need to get yourself sorted out, son. Seriously, you need to have a word with yourself. Anyway, folks, listen, good evening. Sorry, it's so late. Look upon this as a little bonus, if you call my videos bonuses. I did mention in the waffle I wasn't going to be doing any videos this week because I've got a certain show that I need to prepare for, and I shouldn't say this, but I leave all these things to the last minute. You know, the weird thing is, I'm actually one of probably the most organised people that you could find when it comes to kind of just stuff. But when it comes to certain things like kind of pieces of work and what have you, I tend to kind of leave it to the last minute because I always know that I'm capable of getting it done in time. And it's the same with it was the same with exams when I was at school. I used to leave I used to leave the what do you call it? Not swatting. What do you call it? Revision. I used to leave that to the very last minute, and literally the day before my exam, I would try and cram it in, which isn't clever at all. And it's the same with this Blackpool gig. I've left it right to the very last minute, so I've now I did my John Romero questions yesterday. I've done my Legends questions tonight, and that just leaves me with the indie ones, which I'm going to do tomorrow. Yeah, I'll probably do tomorrow. Excuse me. And then hopefully have a little, hopefully have a Thursday off. Just do not very much. Just kind of chill out and look forward to Blackpool. So anyway, listen, you've seen the title. It's another Watch with Mamemeister. I tend to kind of, when I'm doing videos, if I get to a point where I'm bored or I think that it's getting a bit stale, then I tend to kind of stop doing it. And you're probably thinking, well, why the fuck have you been doing a waffle for 12 years or 9 years? That probably turned stale years ago. But yeah, I think it's probably not so much when it's gone stale, it's more the point where I get kind of bored of it. And it was the same with that Watch with Mamemeister. I don't know, I just thought it kind of was a bit rubbish. But yeah, since I started early with the questions tonight, I managed to get them finished. And I thought, fuck it, let's do a video. So anyway, without much further ado, we're going to crack on. Now, for your delectation, I have picked, I'm going to move this over here so I can see what I'm doing. You go away. I've picked a program. I don't know where I got it from. It's called Once Upon an Atari. Once Upon Atari. It's, and I think it's about 4 parts. It's half an hour long, so hopefully we'll watch one, see how we get on. It's not going to be, I don't think it's a funny thing. It's actually quite serious, so I'm, never mind me making my stupid comments. Enjoy what we're going to watch. Before I start, let me have a quick, let's move the questions back over there again. Quick little, see who's in tonight. We have got Mr. Steve Gaming. Evening, Steve. Mark, whatever. Pleasant surprise. Well, that depends on your perception of surprise, I suppose. Al hasn't packed his underwear for Blackpool yet. You're absolutely on the money, Mark. That'll be a 5 to 10 on Friday night thing. Idea for Al for mug level 2 the dream. I hope you're asking Romero if he's been to Scotland much, seeing as he's only in Galway. Yeah, just I only found that out last week that he actually lives in Ireland now. Evening, Dale. Just good luck for me for Saturday. You will be great, I'm sure. Well, hopefully, Dale. Hopefully I don't screw it up. I don't think I will. I'm actually really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to more meeting people than doing that. But I mean, I don't mind admitting it's awesome. I feel very, very privileged that I've been asked to do that because it's why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I? Evening, Lewis. How are you, mate? I know you don't drop in very often. I hope you're well, mate. But yeah, it's an absolute privilege. and a pleasure to get to meet people that were part of my growing up, especially John Romero. I mean, fucking hell, John Romero, Jesus. You can't get any bigger than him, you know what I mean? So anyway, without much further ado, let's crack on with this. Hopefully this is going to work. If it doesn't work, I don't want any smart comments about you're stupid, whatever, because you know what will happen? You'll get banned, and then I'll call you out in the waffle. It's weird. I noticed Mr. whatever his name, I'm not going to mention his name because he's a fucking twat. I noticed his channel appears to have disappeared. Hopefully he'll turn up at Blackpool and I can buy him a pint of piss. Right. Right, let's give this a go. Let's see if this is going to work. Don't know what the volume is going to be like. It's showing up anyway. Right, this is Once Upon a Atari, episode 1, and this is called House of Games. Enjoy.
January 11th, 1981, I reported for my first day of work as a game programmer at Atari, and changed my life forever. Back then, Atari was everywhere, and if you didn't have the games yourself, you probably hung out with someone who did. Atari was a truly amazing place to work, and an amazing story. So I got my friends together because we're the only ones who can tell you this story. We were there. So here it is, for the first time ever, the real story of the beginning of the industry and the phenomenon of video games. And it's called Once Upon Atari.
Not loud enough, let me know.
Welcome to Once Upon Atari. I'm Howard Scott Warshaw, and I was a game engineer at Atari. We made the term video game both a household word and the top of every Christmas list. Atari games changed our culture, but the impact it had on those of us who made those games was far greater. Once Upon Atari shares these deeply personal experiences with you. In this episode, we'll explore the environment in which those games were made. It was a workplace none of us had ever imagined before, and regrettably,
Evening, Shinobi.
have never experienced since.
Atari was a really crazy place. You had to look where you were going because otherwise you might be hit by a flying lemon. People were playing bocce lemons in the hallway. There were constantly pranks going on.
The day we flew the frog.
The sprinkler lobotomy.
My first or second day there, I saw all these men coming out of the women's bathroom. I thought this was kind of odd. And I found out that there was a little lounge room that was off the main bathroom where they would all going there to get stoned. And
sounds like the perfect place.
That was Atari.
It was all sort of started by Nolan Bushnell, who was the founder, and he kind of instilled this, family-friendly feeling, parties every Friday, but you had to get your job done, otherwise you didn't hang around too long.
An environment with little discipline, but yet with clearly stated goals. And in general, that's in conflict with a corporate form. So I felt that one of the things that had to happen was that the true sources of the creative thought almost had to be disconnected a little bit from the corpus.
It wasn't run like a business in that building, and nobody really wanted it to be run like a business.
It was a real shock for people who came into Atari. Remember, I had a new boss come in named George Kish, and seemed like a pretty straight-laced guy and everything, and he comes in to manage a group of game developers, and I think the first several weeks he didn't know what hit him.
What I expected was a company. What I expected was a business. What I got was a very unique environment with a bunch of individuals who did not respond well many times to management, did not want to respond to other management, did not wanted to just march, their own way.
Atari was the first place that I worked at where there was such strong individual contribution to the products that were being made, and that people had a lot more control and say in what they were doing.
So
I basically have never had a boss. I've never had anybody tell me, Rob, do it this way, or Rob, this is what you should do.
He's like a young.
The first time I was there, of course, it seemed like a perfect job.
There was this concept of passion. If you were passionate about playing games, that was something that was extremely important to us. That as somebody who sort of looked at it as a 9-to-5 job, they tended to turn out pretty dreadful stuff.
If you have a place where you're making video games, if people are not ultra disciplined, which they're probably not because they tend to go make games for a living, there's lots of goof-off partners. And there were a lot of people that couldn't handle it.
There was always somebody running around the halls yelling, and it was, there really wasn't much structure to the place, which kind of made it good.
And it's not the case if you go work at a Hewlett-Packard or an IBM or an Intel. But Atari, there's games everywhere. And the distinction between work and play gets so blurred that if you're not really disciplined, you can just never get work done.
The lack of direction promoted initiative. You know, I mean, and it basically created a sense of work for me of commitment and responsibility.
I remember when I started, they just said, we want you to do a game in about 6 months. Here's the equipment, here's the manuals. There's people around you can ask questions. You have no set hours. We don't really want to see you till the game is almost done. So at the very beginning, it was completely free, and it was great.
Great fun. It was probably the most fun place I'd ever worked, either before then or afterwards. It was just a lot of really fun, crazy people.
Lots of times we'd have these Friday afternoon things, and that'd be it. We wouldn't come back to work.
The story I like to tell the rookies who were saying, what was your old times like? I always tell them this story. That is, every Friday, the vice president of engineering would give his keys and a company credit card to one of the engineering technicians with orders to take his car down to the liquor store and fill it with booze and ice and soft drinks and bring it back. And then announce over the intercom, Friday party's begun. So you go to the Friday party, and pretty much it was a pretty damn good party. There was always lots of booze, and it was always bought by someone who cared. So the thing I tell the rookies, though, is there were many, many times that I was at my desk working when the call went out, Friday parties going on, and I would continue working at my desk because I was doing something I really liked, and I didn't have time to party right then.
We always used to say that the Atari ethic was to work hard, play hard, because you had to play really fast, because otherwise you got no play in, because the work was very, very demanding and quite time-consuming.
Despite the fact it was an intense party atmosphere, people worked hard. You came in on Saturday, you couldn't find a place to park your car. Sunday, likewise, it was very hard. And the only people that were getting paid anything to be there on the weekend were some of the engineering technicians. They were getting paid time and a half overtime to be there when they had to be there. But the people that were filling the parking lot were programmers, and they weren't getting paid anything to be there. They were doing it because they loved the job, they loved the people they were working with. So that's what Atari taught me, and I think it's a lost lesson.
And we'll find out exactly how that lesson was lost in our next episode. But for now, let's take a look at a typical day at Atari, and the atypical characters of which that day was comprised.
Typical day would be, I would be one of the first people in, and I would wake Rick Maurer up, who had fallen asleep from working all night the night before. He'd be lying on the computer terminal, on the keyboard. I'd wake him up and send him home.
You'd go stumbling into your office around 10 in the morning, and typically you could smell marijuana seeping out from under some offices.
I walk in the morning and try to find out, well, are there any dead bodies around, first of all? Did anybody get in trouble overnight? Is there anybody in jail? That's in the morning. I mean, check the police blotter.
And code, and how do I fix this bug? Typical programmer BS. And then a couple hours later, go round up a crony and smoke a joint on the way to lunch and have lunch.
There wasn't the sense of a business like everyone arrived at a certain time and left at a certain time. And everybody sort of had their own schedule that they fell into.
I would stroll in around 11 o'clock or so in my shorts and tank tops and flip-flops and go get my coffee and then work on whatever project I was at.
sit down and do some work, and eventually someone would come over and start playing your game, and you'd play it back, and you'd start having different features and brainstorming, and you'd go play somebody else's game.
To me, the most productive time was always the morning. A lot of people didn't come in until later. And I was never a person who stayed terribly late.
I know that the janitorial staff comes through around 3 in the morning, and they have a key, so you can't lock them out. So you have to take the little rubber wedge and wedge it under the door so that you can get a few hours sleep.
When I was working on projects, I would tend to fall into whatever schedule of that the engineer that I was working with was doing. So if they were coming in at 2 and leaving at, midnight, then that's when I would come in and leave.
Then you'd go into the game room and check out some of the arcade games and let off some steam and
go back and think and work.
You'd work until wee hours of the morning.
Get in the car with Dave and roll up a joint.
Didn't know there was a typical day. I don't think we ever
There
had
you go.
one.
That's the perfect
I never
answer.
thought we really had a particularly
There was no
typical
typical day.
No.
There were like 2 kinds of days at Atari. One kind of day was just long, drawn out, real like solving bugs in code and kind of the boring side of the game development process. And then the other day was an event day where there'd either be someone like Spielberg going through, or the Disney people were visiting, or people from the Children's Television Workshop.
That was what was so exciting about Atari, was that we got to meet a lot of really famous people. We got to brainstorm with them.
Here was Steven Spielberg. Got to play my game with him. He loved it and asked for the first one. It was pretty amazing.
I remember going and doing the Muppets, going to New York to meet the various people who were Jim Henson and Chris Surf, and we got taken out to 21.
We had a lot of other visitors, but none of them were really quite as wild as the characters who actually worked in the place.
It's that kind of crowd. Very diverse interests, no shallow people. Not like nowadays.
It was a very creative atmosphere.
One of the things I realized about everybody that worked there was everybody had some hobby of kind of their own that they were into, and in some ways that determined what games they were working on.
People always think about who are the people writing video games. They must be these kids in high school and, no technical background at all, just hacks. And that's not the case, because at Atari, most of the people there were graduates of respected schools, Berkeley, Stanford, and people had master's degrees.
There was no one working at Atari in engineering, let me clarify this, or in the art department as it grew later, who was not really an intelligent or interesting person.
There were a lot of brilliant people there, as well as being characters.
Carla Malinsky. I guess she probably has a lot of strong influence on me. Like I said, I'm wearing the pearls and t-shirt in honor of her.
It was Carla Malinsky, who was one of the few women programmers there. She was real wacky. She'd be dancing around the lab, and she did some really good games.
Polaro was the guy who, it was like he used to try so hard, and he considered himself such a failure. And I'm not really quite sure why. He did Defender, and that was one of the most successful games, but it was like, he always made it seem like it was just such an effort and so difficult.
He would memorize the alphabet backwards, so that if he ever get pulled over for drunk driving, he would know it so well that even if he was drunk, he wouldn't get a ticket.
Within the first week, Rob Zadibble raked me over the coals to see what, he was shaking me down to see what I knew, and I found I was coming up lacking here.
Rob was a pretty serious character most of the time, and when I first met him, I thought that he was very much, like, I couldn't believe that he was doing games, because he was so intense and so serious. I mean, I sort of like thought, well, how could this person be creating something that's fun for other people?
Rob is very, very bright, and a little, if possible, perhaps, he's a little acerbic, I think.
Rob Zadibble was probably the angriest human being I'd ever met in my life. He was angry all the time. He was angry the first day I started there. He told me he didn't like me.
I don't know why he did that, but I always kind of held it against him for the next 15 years that I've known him. But I've gotten to like the guy since then.
As I got to know him and actually work with him, I realized that he was a very fun character, and actually had some very interesting insights into what made good games and what made something fun to play.
Todd was a high school dropout, but he's one of the most clever programmers I've ever known. Horribly maligned, I think, in the final analysis. And an incredibly amusing guy. Remember, Todd used to talk about victims of biology, and he was going to form, yes, which he considered us all to be, and he was going to form a company called VobSoft, Victims of Biology. And he had a little song which he sang, which I can still remember to this day. It was brain damage, baby, but that's okay. I had my EST today. Electroshock therapy, that's what I mean. Todd was a musician as well as a programmer, and much maligned.
And I got an environment to indulge acting out. You know, it's like, I never really thought of myself as a particularly odd fellow. I've heard rumors to the effect that I've had memorable impact on numerous people. Now I live in this skin. There's nothing particularly odd about either the skin or the thing that lives in it. I know one event. Obviously there's the apocryphal climbing the walls sprinkler lobotomy story.
Boom! 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 Whenever you heard that sound at Atari, you knew that Todd was walking the walls.
Todd Fry walking on the wall. I don't know if anybody else remember this.
I walked into the environment where I was going to be working, into the building, and I saw one of the senior programmers, Todd Fry, had a bandage on his head. And so I asked Todd, hey, well, how'd you get that? I mean, what happened?
This guy, Todd, had this strange habit of, I don't know what you'd call it, but sort of shimmying down the hallway.
Todd, who was a very tall person and used to be in construction, his favorite thing to do was to put one foot on one wall and the other foot on the other wall.
And I was like, off of the floor on the walls. I was like, that was just a first step. I mean, obviously, we're engineers, right? So what we do is like develop the system and explore its like capabilities and like develop new features. So then I discovered that what I could do is like with this hopping motion is I could jump further up the walls.
He liked to climb the walls and be like a spider and get as high as he could.
Then I discovered that not only could I go upwards, but I could go horizontally too. And like I'd go cruising down the halls, you know, like 4 feet off the floor.
The width of the walls was not so great that he couldn't just get high velocity going along the wall.
Flying down this hallway, like all the way up with my head all the way up at the ceiling. I came to an open door, and there's a normal technique for dealing with open doors. You just jump down.
And when he went to dismount, he kind of jumped up and caught his head right here on the sprinkler system.
Right here, I still have the scar. It like ripped my forehead open. Cut me pretty bad. I was bleeding pretty bad. It's that kind of forehead blood, right? Well, blood. There was blood.
And he had to be rushed off to the hospital.
When we tried to explain that to the nurses, you know, they said, well, how'd you do this? And so I told them the story, and they just laughed and said, yeah, no, what really happened?
And I got a call from someone at Atari saying that Todd had an accident and was in the hospital, and that I should come and pick him up and we should leave early. And I was a little concerned what happened, and when I found out, it was kind of a joke.
But that was what really happened.
So they actually put that down on the accident report. Programmer injured while climbing the walls, which I still think is like almost the height of coolness.
That was Todd.
Yeah, crazy would be Todd, weird would be Howard.
Who was totally manic. He would tell the most amazing jokes, and he had this whip because he was doing Raiders of the Lost Ark.
A big honking bullwhip. And used to walk up and down the halls, snapping that thing. And, you know, new people that get hired on were scared to death. They couldn't believe it.
The famous line was, the whip's necessary for R&D, research and discipline.
I think Howard was a frustrated stand-up comedian. He wanted to be more into show business than, being a software engineer.
He would be walking around with his Dixie cup and his cigarette and telling you ideas about things and doing all these voices.
He made an awful lot of people uncomfortable because he just always wanted to focus and talk about what the main issue was.
He also one day came in with one half of his beard shaved off and the other half of his mustache. And he wore it like that for about a week, and nobody really noticed.
There's this character, how much fun can I have and still go to heaven? There's that character, and Howard is one of those. And the people that had that character were the people that really succeeded at Atari, that really could goof off enough and get your work done. Those were the guys.
We used to have an institution called the MRB, which was announced openly over the intercom. MRB were the initials for Marijuana Review Board.
Unlike any other working place, it was with the marijuana going on at work. It was like just totally blatant, and I don't know. I felt kind of uncomfortable about that.
About 3 o'clock every afternoon, the people in the office next door would light up their funny cigarettes. And
these offices, they have the false ceilings, so the smoke went right over into his office. I'm sure it was appalling to him.
And I was trying to have meetings with people outside the organization at the time, and I'd see these eyes go up and these noses kind of start to smell. And by that time, I was so used to it that it didn't bother me, or I didn't even think about it. And they said, well, what's that smell? And so I had to learn not to have meetings in my office and in the late afternoons.
I think one story I want to tell that's sort of a, I don't know, well, no, I'm not going to tell that.
He had this, I guess he was an engineering VP.
And he was French, and not a lot of people liked this guy.
And we went down to Edmond Scientific one day. We got one of these giant 4-foot across plastic frogs.
Had no idea what was going on. I didn't know most of the people. And I remember Carla said, you've got to come.
They had this huge inflatable frog that they were trying to fly off of the roof of the building.
We went up to the roof, and there were a bunch of people there with this inflated frog trying to get it into the air, and it just wouldn't go.
We had these helium tanks, and we were filling balloon after balloon.
People were coming back with weather balloons and tying, 6 or 7 of them to it.
And flew it from the roof of Atari on a string. There's a little message to Michelle. In fact, on the side of the frog, I think it says, "Kiss me," and we changed that to say, "Kick me."
And it looked great.
And I think the frog actually floated in front of his window. And I don't remember what happened after that. I think some people got in trouble.
I think he was demoted, the guy whose idea it was. They were going to let him go, but they decided, well, it's Atari.
But I was just a bystander, so I didn't get in trouble.
That's still remembered in many minds as the day we flew the frog.
God, I mean, the closest thing happened today where we went and we ransacked somebody's cubes for those whiteboard sections that fit in the cubes. And we were there with our screwdrivers taking them out, and they were abandoned. And we took them up to my cube and plugged them in. And I thought, oh, shades of Atari. And I thought, how pathetic. Here I'm relating this whiteboard event to going and stealing an Apple sign or flying a frog or these hotel room pranks or whatever. That's what I miss.
Me too. Atari was an outrageously fun place to work. But like any great ride, there was an admission fee. And unfortunately, not everyone could afford the fare.
It wasn't all fun and games. It took a toll on some people. There was a lot of stress.
And we were all under incredible pressure to get these games out. We had like 6 months to get an entire game out, and that's unheard of today.
What happens is your life becomes seamlessly integrated with your projects.
I was so intensely involved with, it was Fireworld at that time was the product, that I did not remember my best friends' names. I did not remember people's names. I remembered coworkers' names. I saw them every day.
But we would just lock ourselves in an office, and Howard had pizza boxes and soda cans just totally packed in his office because he never left his office. And he didn't really want to go in there because it kind of stunk of ancient pizza. And
wasn't really much of a foundation for like a healthy human life. I know that several of the programmers ended up running into personal or family or wife problems, and you know, because the passion sometimes becomes all-consuming and squeezes out the significant others. It was my family, it was my home, it was my job, it was my future, it was my past, it was my hopes, and it was my fears, it was everything. Atari was everything to me. It's all I had.
The one thing about Atari was there were more nervous breakdowns than any other place I've ever worked.
We had a couple of people go off the deep end at Atari. We had one guy, I came into work one day, I forget who it was, who was in his office with Jimi Hendrix, and they were waiting for the Pope so they could go out to lunch. And finally they took him off to Agnew's in a little van that morning. He'd been in his office all night apparently with Jimmy, waiting for the Pope to show up for lunch.
Another one, he hadn't shown up for 5 days, and I went to his house to look for him, or his apartment to look for him, and the door was open, I walked in, and he was sitting in a room with no furniture and in the dark, just staring at the wall.
And we had another guy who kept his office dark all the time. He had an interior office with no windows, and he went in there, it was always pitch black. He had a lamp, but it was rarely on. Mostly the thing was only illuminated by the flickering light of the video screen. And one day, he just kind of went a little catatonic in his little black box there, and they had to wheel him away.
An environment with little discipline.
There were a lot of people that couldn't handle it.
All of a sudden I get thrust into this amazing revolution cauldron of the video game business, and I got sort of sucked into it.
I was always torn between sort of trying to say, well, this is an aberration and not every job I have is going to be like this. And then at the same time, it was hard not to get caught up in it because of the fact that everybody was into it.
Atari was my view of corporate America. And I went from this really, really zany place to some place where people worked from 9 to 5. They were very serious. Practical jokes were not heard of. People did not get stoned all day long. It was boring. I still miss Atari.
Lots of craziness, lots of bizarre personalities doing strange things on a daily basis. It's kind of like this big bright spot in my life.
There was no question that once you get used to, I mean, I'm 22 years old. I have a job where I have complete creative autonomy. Nobody is telling me what kind of product to make. No one's telling me how to make it. Not very many people have this experience.
What I did at Atari took a phenomenal amount of dedication. A man with a mission. The product is the mission. I am a man with a mission.
It became this passionate, almost religious quest. And the more religious fervor, the better and more interesting the games turned out to be.
Atari really helped to hone that part of my personality.
It's like one of those kind of magical things that happens in your life, and you don't know why it happened, you don't ask why it happened, you just experience it and it goes away, and you think back about it for the rest of your life.
It shaped me. It's a major portion. I mean, I still talk about Atari days. It's a major chunk of my life that was I think I'd be a very different person if I didn't work at Atari.
We shaped the video game business. We created the video game business that we have today. God knows what those video games did to the minds of the kids that played them. I think about this a lot. I mean, adults now, that by the time they were 12, they played 100,000 hours of those early VCS games that we made. Well, you know, I watched 100,000 hours of TV, and when I was 12, and I certainly, as I'm getting older, realized the effect that had on me. A lot of kids walking around now are shaped by the video games they played when they were younger. And the message was pretty clear: you always lose. Now it's the 90s, and there's a lot of nihilism and in our music and in our culture. It's like these kids grew up, and what's coming out is, well, we always lose. There's a pointlessness going on. I believe video games have a key role in the inner world of a lot of people. We didn't grow up with that. People from my culture grew up with, it'll all work out. You know, the end, roll credits. It will always work out in the end. The next generation that we helped create, or we helped form, was we always lose, and we're all responsible for that.
Absolutely insane. Sounds like the absolute perfect place to work, doesn't it? Listen, it's 10:10. Who wants one more? It's half an hour. Will we go for one more? Yeah, fuck it. Let's go for one more. I'm deliberately not really speaking because at the end of the day, these programs are interesting. You don't want them ruined with me blabbing shite. So let me just remove that, and let's try and share another video. Just bear with me. Yeah, what was it called again? Once Upon Atari. Right, okay, there's 4 parts to this. Yeah, right, this is part 2 of Once Upon Atari. Enjoy.
On January 11th, 1981, I reported for my first day of work as a game programmer at Atari, and changed my life forever. Back then, Atari was everywhere, and if you didn't have the games yourself, you probably hung out with someone who did. Atari was a truly amazing place to work, and an amazing story. So I got my friends together because we're the only ones who can tell you this story. We were there. So here it is, for the first time ever, the real story at the beginning of the industry and the phenomenon of video games. And it's called Once Upon Atari. Welcome to Once Upon Atari. In the early 1980s, Atari became the fastest growing company in American business. And shortly thereafter, it became the fastest falling company in American business. How does all this happen? The answer lies not within any one part of the company, but rather with the way the parts of the company came together. And whether it's chemistry or alchemy, there's no denying one fact. Atari was a very volatile mixture.
There's a synergy, there's a magical chemistry to the way the whole thing worked out.
I really liked what I was doing. I like working on computers, and I like doing art on computers in particular.
These people were my friends and my coworkers, and we were sort of united in this quest for cool stuff.
And it wasn't about money at first. You know, it was about the work, the art. It was about the muse.
I could do whatever I wanted. I could buy whatever equipment I wanted, go on the kind of trips that I wanted. I could pick and choose the business trips and you know, the boondoggles whenever we wanted them. It was very interesting.
Taking a little piece of silicon and putting a $20 to $40 price tag on it, it was a little gutsy. I mean, because most companies, when they think of doing something, say, oh, if I can build it for $1, I'll sell it for $2 and I'll make some money. The thought of making it for $3 and selling it for $20 or selling it for $40, I take great pride in that as a concept because it really created the fundamental infrastructure, and anybody that's tried to violate that has failed. Has failed.
It wasn't about the money at first, because there wasn't any money at first. I worked just as hard for $15,000 a year as I did for $1 million a year.
When I first signed in at Atari in '79, the basic philosophy which we treated programmers was the following. We hired people in. You sat them down. You said, here's a manual, here's an office, here's a development system. Make a game, have some fun, you know? Party on Friday.
From a management viewpoint, there was very, very little by way of official training. There was dick by way of training.
After 6 months, you'd kind of walk by their office. And if they were anybody you wanted to have at the company, they'd have a game basically done. Something that they'd thought of that they wanted to do would be basically done at this point. And you'd say, ah, good job. When can we expect to ship that? Or if they didn't, you'd say, look, you're just not going to fit in here. If you need someone to hold your hand and tell you what to do, then we don't really want you.
I think it was probably not the most efficient of high-tech production environments, but it worked out, more or less.
Politically, Atari was an interesting place because no one ever knew who was in control, and there was a tremendous amount of power held by the individuals that were creating the product because they knew what they were making and they knew how to do it.
I mean, I couldn't believe after a while the freedom that I had. And I think part of it was that upper management was so afraid of the organization that we had, of the individuals that we had.
As the company made more money, and as it became more and more apparent that we were in fact the engine that was making the money, we became more disrespectful, we became more blatant in anything we did. We didn't care what they thought anymore because without us they could do nothing. And we realized this, so we got really, really wild.
If they saw product coming out, they were happy. They just didn't want to mix. I mean, they loved to take tours through there, but it was like visiting the zoo. It's like seeing the caged animals, and oh, by the way, this person's doing this, but you better leave him alone because he's busy. See you later, and then walk down the hall.
In some other media or doing an OS or doing something that's a consumer product, one individual doesn't have that much say, and so the politics of the place were always pretty tricky and interesting.
It was a fun place to be. Did I take advantage of the situation? Sure, everybody else did too. Am I sorry? No, I learned a lot. It was great.
There was a sign at old Atari a guy had over his desk, which was burned into my memory, which was, in business, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate.
But one day, I was introduced to my new boss. Larry Kaplan was one of the original programmers at Atari, and they decided to bring him back in a PR move that they could really highlight the fact that here's one of the founding fathers coming back.
So he at first offered me $75,000 a year to be vice president, and I negotiated with him. And when I walked out of there, I had a $150,000 salary and a guaranteed bonus of $150,000 per year. And I never have made that much money since or before, or even even got close to that. And so that was sort of a high point because I came away from, thinking, I was on top of the world.
One day it was time for my raise. And so I walked into Larry and says, okay, time for my raise. He says, okay, I'll tell you what, you got two choices. I'll either give you this, or you walk across the hall, you play a game of Defender, and I'll give you the score. The score will be your new salary. So here it is. I mean, hanging out in front of me, the pressure was on. I had to decide. So I said, hey, what the heck? I'll play Defender. I got lucky, got a good score, and that was my new salary. He came through. That was great. So that's the kind of story, that's the kind of guy Larry was.
Oh, I remember a funny story. Ray Kassar, the CEO, was really trying to get women to play games. And he would come by and chat with me and say, can't you design a game for women? Something like shopping, or let's go to the market, or let's design our house. And it was like, no, Ray, that's not the way you get women involved. But he didn't get it.
Steve Ross used to come visit us, and every time he came, there'd be a bomb threat. For some reason, whenever the high-level Warner people came, there was always a bomb threat. We always had to leave.
It sometimes seemed like a comfortable, incredible place to be that seemed to have its act together and know what it was doing. And then at other points, it reached into being just maddening shifts of like nobody knew anything that was going on.
The scary thing was, I guess, it didn't feel like a business, but the money was rolling in.
I guess a lot of people were hip to what was happening. And then, of course, Larry Kaplan, Bob Whitehead, Al Miller, and Dave Crane. We called them Fantastic Four. We called them the Fantastic Four because they'd written so much of the software that was done at the time. And they got wind of just how much money Atari was making. They were the first ones to do so.
Early on, I saw them as engineering hires that would be bonused and optioned. And we were always hoping that everybody would make some good money.
And they wrote this letter back to Ray Kassar saying, give us a share, give us a fair share. You know, what we're getting here is salary, which at the time was like $35,000 a year. And that's not right.
The money was always a sore point because it was obvious that Atari was making billions of dollars.
And we want a fair cut. Royalty program or something. And Ray wrote back this letter which basically dismissed them entirely, including one phrase which specifically said, quote, "You're nothing but a bunch of towel designers. You're a dime a dozen." To which they said, fine, if you can replace us so easily, do so.
And there were people who left, you know, the Activision group because specifically about the money.
And they walked off and they found venture capital to back them. And in doing so, in order to show the venture capital people how much money was being made, red flags went up all over the industry. Hey, there's a lot of money out here. Previously, Atari had been a privately held company of Warner. So no one really knew just how much money there was to be made, what a gold mine Warner had. So when these guys hit the street looking for venture backing, everyone found out what was really going down.
As time went on, it soon became clear that there were rock stars, that there were people of extraordinary talent that deserved to make a whole bunch of money.
I decided to leave Atari, and that was after I had finished a product called Missile Command.
It had sold very well. It was doing excellently.
It felt very much like the real Missile Command. People loved it. I think they sold 2-3 million copies of the thing. I was very proud of it.
And Rob was like, boy, I busted my butt for this. I have really done this for this company. I know I'm going to be rewarded for doing this.
I finished, I think, in September. It was Christmas, time for our bonus checks to be handed out. And I said, well, here's where I get to see what happens to a good boy. I was a good boy.
And they gave him an envelope at Christmas, and he's thinking, wow, what is it?
You know, 10, 15,000 would have made me really happy. The product had generated, I think, $30-40 million in sales.
That check for $100,000, maybe a new car. He rips it open, and
I got a certificate for a complimentary Armor Star turkey that was, and a letter from Ray Kassar thanking me for the contribution I'd made to the Atari team. And I sat there dumbfounded. I couldn't believe that I got a turkey for doing Missile Command. I sat there, and I remember thinking, I didn't know a lot about business at the time. I was 23 years old, but I remember thinking, how stupid. You know, I'm going to leave because of this. And all they had to do was give me, you know, 10 grand. They give me the keys to a car. I would have sat and given another 2-3 products.
He told me he still has it hung in his office in a plaque on the wall.
And probably still redeemable.
Their value to the company was such that you could easily see that they would have value to another company. And so therefore the auction market concept of what is this person really worth locks in, and you have to respond to it.
They let the cat get out of the bag, and some of the geese that could lay the golden eggs had already flown the coop. Atari had to do something fast before they lost the entire farm.
People were leaving the company. You had Activision starting up, and then iMagic.
Atari did so much to try and keep us.
Actually, it is difficult to work out decent models for compensation in technology firms. It's just a tough job.
We were constantly given new bonus programs at Atari. Every time you'd turn around, there'd be a new bonus program. And the management's wringing their hands going, oh dear, with this new bonus program, we won't be able to keep programmers 6 weeks. You guys will be so rich after your next project that you're just going to buy that house in Malibu and the one in Paris and a third one in Hawaii and we'll never see you again. Oh gosh, this is tragic. And they would lay out the terms of the bonus program, and 6 months later you wouldn't have made a nickel. But there'd be a new bonus program, which was going to make you so rich.
Okay, so in early '82, Howard and I are approached. Some unnamed investor wants to hire us away for stock, decent salaries, release bonuses, royalties, pie in the sky. One of the senior programmers came to me and told me that they'd been approached by a venture capitalist looking to start a new company and to steal at least 3, maybe even 4 of the senior people. George had only been there a couple months, poor guy. And I sat down and said, you know, George, I really like working here. but it's beginning to cost me money.
The company felt that we couldn't lose any more of the senior people, which would leave us without much experience. So I immediately called my boss, and I guess all hell started to break loose, because before you know it, that afternoon I was in the office of the chairman, Ray Kazar, with a number of other management individuals who were all very nervous about losing key individuals.
2 days later, they sat us down in the meeting room and they said, here is the new compensation package.
They actually delivered, and on a royalty-based plan, and we got some money.
That was a memorable moment. It's that day Ray, or I think it was Ray and Mike Moon, pulled us all into the conference room and told us we're getting royalties.
And the new compensation package was a $30,000 check for a bunch of us who had just released products. And it was a $30,000 release bonus and 10 cents per cartridge. That sounded pretty good.
The goal was to create a bonus plan that would reward Todd Fry, who had written the Pac-Man cartridge, and make him the first video game millionaire programmer. And then whatever other people made, well, they'd make a lot of money too, but maybe not $1 million like Todd did.
The $30,000 check really got my eyes.
Getting that first big check was just astounding.
We just looked at our checks and couldn't believe it.
And it was in my hands.
That first night, I had the check on my nightstand, and I kept waking up to look at it, see if it was for real.
I've never seen so much money in one place in my life.
Pretty memorable moment then, because it wasn't the same from that point on.
May that year I got my first check for $250,000+. And that was a very impactful experience.
He bought 2 Alfa Romeo cars, the convertible and the top-of-the-line GTV6, and one day the GTV6 caught on fire, so he just left it on the side of his road because it was meaningless. You just buy another one.
We were famous for partying, and we actually formed a club. It's called the Dumb Shits Club. And it's everybody who never made any real money at Atari. Then I got kicked out of it because I actually did make some money at Atari towards the end. Some pretty decent money. But then I lost it all, so I got voted in. I'm now the president of the club.
The days that stick out in my mind are the royalty days, where we'd all be lined up outside the door to Larry Kaplan or whoever's giving out the checks, and one after the other, and we'd be going in, and Larry'd have a stack of checks on his desk, and here's your $300,000, and here's your $150,000, and here's your $20,000, and then we'd all get together and we'd go out the back,
$5,000
and here's your $5,000, and yes.
I remember handing out checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars to programmers who, they were wearing their sandals and their jeans and their t-shirts, and mostly dirty t-shirts, and sometimes hadn't bathed in a few days, and these guys were running out with their $300,000-$400,000 checks, putting them in the bank, and if the bank accepted them and didn't question them at the time.
Like 10 of us would line up, in a line with all these checks from $300,000 on down to $10,000, and the poor cashier would be sitting there as each one of us would come and make the deposit.
Handing the woman the check, and she goes, she wasn't even surprised. She said, "Oh yes, you work at Atari. I've seen a bunch of these checks." And she called over, another one of the tellers, "Look at this check." They work at Atari.
And they'd pull back up with brand new cars and park them, instead of in the parking lot, as close to the front doors as they possibly could, and it was just an interesting situation.
I remember calling my parents and saying, "Oh, if you ever need money, I've got tons of it here,
I don't know what the whole compensation schedule was that year, but I know a lot more people made $100,000 than would have otherwise. So they should look at me as a hero, which they don't.
Well, money made things weird.
I always remember that time that Todd, when they gave he got the $300,000 check, he showed it, he was flashing it around, $310,000. It was just really pretty amazing. He was just screaming, and he was walking the walls, He didn't care if he struck his head on the fire
extinguisher thing. Some people viewed me as a genius and some people viewed me as a clown. And when I got all of that money, it just made them that much more inclined to look at me as a clown.
From the coin-op division, there was a poster of Pac-Man. Someone scribbled on it, "Why Fry?" I remember that.
So here it is on the wall. Why Fry? I guess there was some resentment of me already by then. I'm pretty sure of it. And it is a good question, actually. And the bottom line is, why Fry? Is because the product I wrote and was making the most money for the company. But I took out a little pen and put that engineer's mark, the bar across it, which means not, and changed the poster into "Why Not Fry?" Which is also a perfectly reasonable question.
He was a bright guy, but wasn't like a school programmer. He had kind of learned on the skin of his teeth. So he was basically working for less money than anyone. He was working, I think, for like 20% lower than other people. And we used to hear about this 2-3 times a day. Todd was getting less money than anyone. So it was just great that he was the guy who ended up doing Pac-Man and made $2-3 million on the thing. I remember in the locker room at Atari, someone wrote, "Why Fry?" ? There was so much bitterness and anger about the fact that this guy had made so much money. But it was a great kind of ironic moment in life that the guy, programmer who wasn't getting paid a nickel, got the top game to do.
I really think I was much more strong technically than I was given, than I was ever recognized as. But after I got all that money, that was all you could see.
And yeah, people lost their heads. The money just made people go crazy. People thought they were, Leonardo da Vinci. And people did not have the perspective to realize that they were simply in the right place at the right time and happened to make a lot of money. They thought, I'm finally discovered as an artist. And if you're kind of an insecure, paranoid person, that just fueled your insecurity and your paranoia to the point of, I think people went a little bit crazy.
In some ways it was irresponsible of Atari. It was a life-threatening thing to put that much money in the hands of such monomaniac, egomaniac, neurotic freaks who were under so much stress to produce. And the only reason you did well at Atari is if for some reason you wanted to be stressed.
And where was all this stress coming from? One source may have been interdepartmental relations. Stable structures are built on solid foundations, like when marketing and engineering work together as a team.
And if the synergy is there and the people can work together, I think that's the best of both worlds. That's one of the things I learned, because we definitely didn't have that at Atari. I think that was one of the biggest problems that we fought, and I think that led to a lot of the downfall of the company.
That first time at Atari was definitely the most fun. No meetings, nothing. There was no marketing people, there weren't no Harvard MBAs.
So the marketing people were not into games, so we were just left alone to make it up whatever we want.
We designed the game from scratch. The input we got from marketing was a memo that would come out every 6 months or so that listed 10 games that they wanted. I remember the perennial #1 game on their list was always Rock Fight. Now remember, we got no description of the game. We only got a one-word title for the game they would like to do. At the time, that was considered enough to describe a game. Rock Fight was obviously a game where two characters would throw rocks back and forth at each other. Oh, that's good. That's a good, typical marketing game.
We just made up games. And during that period of time, some of the most productive, wonderful games got made, because we really experimented with the medium, which is brand new.
When I came back, that had all disappeared completely. The marketing MBAs were basically in control.
The marketing department had never played a video game. I really recall really understanding it when we were releasing Night Driver, and someone from marketing came over, and they looked at it, and they watched the screen. They watched us driving on the screen. They said, "Wow, that's an amazing effect. How did you ever think of that?" I said, "Well, I just copied one of our coin-op games." And she, of course, had never heard of Night Driver, which was, I think, Atari's #3 selling coin-op game.
They could care less what the game played like. All they cared was that it had the name. If it had Pac-Man on it, it was done.
If there's anything that engineers despise, it's dumb marketeers defining the impossible in both time to market and cost structures. And that happens over and over and over again.
We used to be under so much pressure to do these games.
Everything was done by like a date. You had to finish a game by a certain date, and regardless of what it played like, and it was released and sold.
And so what happens in that case is there is a lack of sensitivity on the part of management to the real world.
We were working with ancient technology, 1974 technology, and we were trying to make this machine do things that it never was meant to do. We would be so proud of ourselves that we would get these tricks to work, and then we would hand it to marketing.
What engineers hate more than anything is to be asked by management to violate the laws of physics. You know?
And the first thing they would say is, why isn't the ball round?
And this is something that marketeers routinely do.
They'd say, how come it's flickering? Or why isn't it like this? And why doesn't it look like more like the arcade game?
Because they clearly didn't have a clue. You know, they'd gone to school and thought, I got an MBA, I can market anything. Ketchup, batteries, video games, they're all the same. I'll just do the marketing, we'll be all set.
I think it's typical in any organization that develops entertainment products like this. People do not understand what goes into developing a good entertainment software product.
And so you'd have these meetings where they're like, well, we should like improve our games. Well, what do you mean? Do you have any idea what that means?
You're going to have people who don't want to, who don't understand what makes a programmer tick, what makes an artist tick, what makes a game designer tick.
As a company, it had a very missing, the political end of it, and the sales and marketing group was very out of touch with what it took to make and to do and to create things.
I mean, they love to come in and take a look and say, hey, wow, that's cool.
I remember on a lot of tours that sales and marketing people would come through bringing someone else, and that after I would sort of say, you know, well, this was the process of how someone does a game, and that we do animation graphics by typing in hex code into something, that sales and marketing person would say, geez, I never realized it, you know, took that to do it.
They don't know that a product needs a period of tuning and tweaking before it becomes the optimum product.
Which was always a frightening thing to me, to realize that they were the ones making decisions and trying to sell the public on what these things were.
They were not creative people, most of these Harvard MBAs, and they had not a clue of what to do. It was actually kind of sad. You sort of felt sorry for them, except that they destroyed the entire video game industry, but other than that, you sort of felt sorry for them.
I know we were, I guess, looked upon as being sort of the prima donnas, and I think there were some tension with the other groups.
The perception was a bunch of, how do I put it nicely? I mean, I don't even know how to put it nicely. It was a bunch of non-hard-working slobs who like to party a lot and not do work.
That's the treatment we got. So we didn't like them, you know, they didn't like us.
You know, it was painfully clear to me going in there and knowing what the process is, that they don't understand the process and they don't understand what goes into developing good games.
We would have these meetings where as soon as you finished a game, they would give you a $40,000 check, because that was part of the royalty agreement. But before they would hand these checks to you, they would get up and make this speech about how lousy we were as a group, what terrible things we did, how our games weren't selling, how we were just basically shits. And then they would say, and now here's your check. And now talk about cognitive dissonance.
Working there was really intense. So like in any kind of intense situation, you get people, you know, not caring. They just pretty much do and act as they would under any kind of intense situation. Call it combat, you know, and that's kind of what it was like. I mean, you've got these people that were thrown in there under these incredible deadlines and work pressure that it was just unbelievable.
But it seemed like a little family, though.
The fur was flying all the time.
But it was like a family, though. Everybody seemed to be watching out for everybody.
And because the pressure was so great, people just either had to quit or deal with it some way. So you dealt with it by, you know, communicating with these people who, like it or not, became pretty good friends, because if they weren't your friends, they were your fucking enemies.
When I went to graduate school, I had to choose between studying business or technology. And I chose technology. I figured I'd learn about business when I got out in the working world. Well, I learned a lot in graduate school, but Atari was an education.
What did I learn at Atari? I don't know if I learned anything at Atari.
I learned that people can be really weird when it comes to a lot of money. You know, you put a couple dollars after the one, and the more zeros you put after there, the weirder people get.
I think they eat you up and spit you out. You know,
Yeah, and
that's what
it's
I
all
learned,
churning it back.
As long as they need you, they love you. But once they don't need you, you're completely expendable.
The biggest lesson I learned at Atari is that a poorly managed company can really go out of business pretty quickly. Here today, gone tomorrow kind of scenario is entirely feasible.
A company run by meetings, and obviously run to the ground by meetings.
Yes, it completely shaped my view of the working world, and God help me if I ever have to go get a real job. Because at this point I don't think I could.
Anything could fall into place, and because this is America, you never know what's going to work for you.
It was just a great experience, and it really built me and gave me confidence as a manager, gave me confidence as a person to go on. And I think it helped. Without that, I don't think I'd be this far along in the business.
I have no regrets and no apologies. And I'm done.
As to whether it failed or succeeded, I think is an interesting question to Silicon Valley, because it's truly a company where everybody went on to continue to do the business. And so even though Atari itself as a company doesn't exist today, I think it does in all the forms of all the people still doing games and still working on being creative.
I have this fear that a recurring nightmare, I'll say, that of theology. When you die, you go to heaven, and what it is just like a quiz after to see if you're going to be reincarnated or not, right? And my terrible fear is the quiz consists of this one question: what did you learn? And I'm going to sit there, for a long time in what is basically purgatory. And finally I'm going to scrawl nothing on the paper and run back to the examiner and say, there, did I get it right? Did I get it right this time? Please don't send me back. So what did I learn at Atari? I don't know. I don't know if you ever learn anything.
We shaped the video game business. We created the video game business that we have today. God knows what those video games did to the minds of the kids that played them. I think about this a lot. I mean, adults now, that by the time they were 12, they played 100,000 hours of those early VCS games that we made. Well, I watched 100,000 hours of TV, and when I was 12, and I certainly, as I'm getting older, realize the effect that had on me. A lot of kids walking around now are shaped by the video games they played when they were younger, and the message was pretty clear: you always lose. Now it's the 90s, and there's a lot of nihilism and in our music and in our culture. It's like these kids grew up, and what's coming out is, well, we always lose. There's a pointlessness going on. I believe video games have a key role in the inner world of a lot of people. We didn't grow up with that. People, most of my culture grew up with, it'll all work out. The end, roll credits. It will always work out in the end. The next generation that we helped create, or we helped form, was we always lose, and we're all responsible for that.
There we have it, folks. Yep, that was part 2 of Upon an Atari. I will be along maybe next week, the week after, with parts 3 and 4. Never watched that programme before. Quite interesting, actually. Certainly sounds like quite a fun place to be. So anyway, guys, it's getting late. It's bedtime. I'm going to let you guys get off. This will probably be the last video that I do this week. I will try and get a Friday waffle out on Friday, if I can. Anyway, listen, I'll let you go. Have a great rest of the week, folks. Thanks for tuning in. As always, guys, thank you very much for watching. See ya.